Chapter 10. Which way now? Jesse asked, his patience wearing thin. Kate scrunched her face in thought. Left, I think. Yes, left.
Are you sure this time?
Once outside of Lisbon, Jesse had allowed Kate to ride alongside him to determine the direction. But so far, she'd made 2 wrong turns and cost them at least an hour. I'm doing my best, she said sharply. I was only there once. Jesse sighed and ran a hand across his chin.
You're right. I'm sorry. So, left?
She looked around them again and then nodded with force. Yes, left, I'm sure. They moved further along the road until they crested a small hill. A house at the base came into view. This is it, Kate proclaimed triumphantly.
That's far enough, Jesse said. You sure this is the place?
Kate frowned at him. I'm sure.
Okay, Jeb, you stay here with Miss Whidby. Jesse and I will go scout it out, Sheriff Johnson said.
Jeb nodded, and Jesse led the way down the hill, keeping his eyes open for any signs of the masked men. They tried to keep the horses quiet to aid in the surprise factor. When they reached the front porch of the ranch house, Jesse pulled Molly up short. The cabin door was ajar. With one finger to his lips, he used the other hand to point the issue out to the sheriff, who nodded in return. The 2 men dismounted quietly and drew their guns. Sheriff Johnson led the way, pushing the door fully open with the muzzle of his gun. As they stepped into the room, it was clear it had been torn apart. Up-ended chairs and clothes lay strewn about the room. The main room had a kitchen to the side, which was empty, but a doorway at the end of the room was closed. Again, Jesse took a cover position as Sheriff Johnson pushed open the door. A large bed filled most of the room. A silent, unmoving figure lay sprawled on the bed, a pool of red surrounding him.
Kate said Bill Easterly had a scar on his hand, Jesse whispered. We should see if it's him.
The sheriff nodded, and the 2 men stepped closer, still remaining alert for anyone else present. Jesse glanced down at the man on the bed. A gunshot to the chest had been his end, but neither of his hands displayed a scar. His ice-blue eyes stared into nothingness.
It's not him, Jesse said. Let's get out of here before Easterly returns.
He took a step back, and something crunched under his feet. Stooping down, he picked up the shattered pieces of what might have been a brooch or a locket. He dropped the pieces in his pocket to show to Kate. Perhaps the item had belonged to either her or Ellen. A part of him wanted to scour the place for any more belongings of Kate, but there would be time for that later. Jesse followed the sheriff out of the house and back up the hill where Kate and Jeb were waiting. Did you find him? Kate asked.
There was a man in the house, but it was not Easterly, as there was no scar on his hand. This man had blue eyes, and it looked like there had been a fight.
Kate nodded. One of the other robbers had blue eyes, the one who opened the coach door. Did you find any of my things?
We need to speak with their sheriff to search the house more, but I did find this. Does it mean anything to you?
He dropped the pieces in Kate's hand. For a moment, her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of the shattered item, and then tears welled in her eyes and a few escaped and trailed down her cheek. This was mine, my mother's brooch. The last thing I had of hers. It was taken in the robbery. Jesse's heart ached at her tears. He knew that emotion all too well. The only thing he had left of Paula was a handkerchief she had once given him. When he wanted a piece of her near, Jesse would pull it to his face and inhale the fresh scent of sage which still lingered on it.
Jesse, why don't you take her back to Sage Creek? Jeb and I will work with the men here to see if we can find any more items, the sheriff suggested. Was there any sign of a woman living in the cabin when you were here? He asked Kate. She shook her head.
but her eyes remained on the broken pieces in her palm. No, there was not a feminine touch in the whole place. I had a few other pieces of jewelry, and I know Ellen and the other woman did as well.
We will gather everything we can find and set up a time for you to claim it later. Thank you for your help.
Let me know if I can help in any other way. Jesse couldn't stop thinking about Kate after he dropped her off at the inn. Clark Davis had said they could grant her 2 nights, which meant she only had 1 more night after tonight. Unless Sheriff Johnson found some of her jewelry or money, she would have no way to continue paying for her room. Nor would she have the money to return home, and he needed her to stay. She was the one person who could identify Bill Easterly and avenge Pauline's death. But to stay, she would need to marry or find employment, and Jesse knew the only place hiring women right now was the saloon. His Christian duty and desire for justice conflicted with his heart, and he pointed Molly toward the cemetery. Though she wouldn't be able to answer, he needed to discuss this idea with the one woman it would matter to. The cemetery was empty when he arrived, and he threw Molly's reins around a tree branch before making his way over to the newly covered plot that housed Pauline's body. He knew she was no longer there, but it was where he felt closest to her. He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair as he stared down at the dirt.
I hope you can see me from where you are, Pauline. I feel a little silly talking to you here, but I want you to know that I miss you. However, I am now in a bind. There is a woman here who was robbed by the same men responsible for your death. In fact, she was supposed to marry one of the men. She escaped, but now she has no money and no family. I do not love her, as my heart still belongs to you, but I feel it is my Christian duty as a man to marry her and take her in. I know you cannot answer me from where you are, but I am here, hoping you will understand and forgive me.
Jesse closed his eyes for a moment, and though he was not expecting an answer, he felt a breeze surround him almost like a caress, and he knew what he had to do. Opening his eyes, he nodded at the grave, replaced his hat, and returned to Molly. Then he headed back to town. Kate watched from the small window to make sure Jesse was gone before she slipped out of the inn. With no money and no marriage, her option now was to find employment. She still didn't have many skills, but thanks to Abigail, she now had experience in teaching. And surely it couldn't be too different here. But where was the schoolhouse? She supposed she could ask Martha, but there couldn't be too many buildings, and she did not mind the walk. Walking had always been relaxing in Boston, and she hoped to find a little of that peace again. The school was at the end of town, a small one-room building with white clapboards, and a bell in a small steeple at the top. The day was just ending when Kate arrived, and a flurry of children raced past her and out of the door. When she was sure they were all gone, Kate stepped into the doorway. A young brunette woman was gathering papers at the desk up front. "Excuse me?" Kate's voice echoed in the now empty building. The woman stopped her shuffling and turned to look at her. "Can I help you?" "Yes, my name is Kate Whidby. I'm new in town, and I was wondering if there might be a job here at the school." The woman shook her head. "I'm sorry, we don't have enough children to need 2 teachers." "Oh, I understand," Kate said, swallowing her disappointment. "Thank you anyway." She turned to leave, and then paused. "Do you know of any place in town that is hiring?" "Just the saloon," the woman said with a small smile. "Right, thank you." A feeling of despair crept in on Kate as she left the school building, but she decided to try other establishments anyway. Unfortunately, she received a similar response in the general store, the cafe, and the post office. Shoulders slumped, Kate returned to the inn. Perhaps the Davises would have some work she could do. "What a long face, Kate," Martha asked as Kate entered the parlor. "I was out looking for a job," Kate said, her eyes downcast. "But no one is hiring." She glanced up. "I don't suppose you need help here at the inn?" Martha's brow creased. "No, I'm sorry, dear, we don't. It's been a tough winter for everyone around here." "I understand." Kate forced a tight smile. "I'll figure something out, I'm sure." "Why don't you sit down and I'll get you some tea?" Martha asked, pointing to an empty chair. Kate nodded and sank into the chair. She had been so sure this move was God's will for her. But now she was stranded in Sage Creek with no husband, no employment, and no money to even go back to Boston. "Lord, please show me what I should do next," she thought, as Martha returned with a teacup and saucer. Tiny wisps of steam curled into the air as Kate took the proffered cup. "I know you have had a difficult time the last few days, but are you doing okay?" Martha asked, as she settled onto the sofa with her own tea. "I am trying to be," Kate said, blowing on her tea as she thought about her words. "In truth, I am worried about what to do next. I know that I cannot stay here forever, but without money or a husband, I am unsure what my next step should be." "I know that can be daunting, but I do believe that God will provide a way for you." Kate hoped so, but she certainly wasn't feeling God's presence at the moment. Just then, the door to the inn opened, and Ellen's frantic voice carried through. "Kate, are you all right?" Kate glanced up to see Ellen hurrying across the room towards her. She set her teacup on the table and stood to greet her friend. "Ellen, what are you doing here?" "James told me he saw you riding out of town with the sheriff and the deputies this morning. What happened? I thought you were getting married." Kate shook her head and motioned for Ellen to join them in the parlor. "Would you believe that the man I was supposed to marry is the same man that robbed us?" "What?" Ellen covered her mouth as she sank into the chair. "Yes, I suppose I have rotten luck." Kate paused to take a sip of her tea. "Something seemed off about him when he picked me up, but when I saw the scar on his hand, I ran. I went looking for Deputy Jennings, got disoriented along the way, and he found me near his home. We rode out there this morning, but Mr. Easterly was gone. I don't know what I'm going to do now, Ellen. Even if they find my clothes, the money and jewelry will be long gone. I have no money to pay for my room here, and I knocked on all the establishment doors this afternoon. The only place in need of work is the saloon, which I can't do. I came out here to get married so I wouldn't be a burden to my brother, and I couldn't even do that right." Ellen leaned back and regarded Kate. "Perhaps you could stay with us." Kate shook her head. "I couldn't do that. Your family does not know me, and they are in mourning for their daughter. It would be too big of an imposition. Maybe I could telegraph my brother and ask for money. I know Abigail might object, and I hate the idea of being an even bigger burden to him than I already am, but I don't see as I have any other option." "Well, there is one other option," Ellen said. "What's that?" Kate asked. "You could still get married." Kate's forehead furrowed in confusion. Had her friend misunderstood her? "Didn't you hear what I said? The man I was going to marry is a thief and a murderer." "I did not mean him," Ellen said, waving her hand. "But this is the West. In case you haven't noticed, there are far more men than women. Perhaps you could find another man looking for a bride. It would be worth at least checking the papers before you head back." Kate bit her lip. Could she do it? What if she chose another outlaw like Bill? Surely the odds of that would be astronomical. But with her luck? Of course, it might be better than admitting to her brother she was wrong. She could just imagine his reproachful look when he learned she had lost all the money. "You're right," Kate said with a sigh. "I guess there is no harm in at least looking." Jesse approached the inn with a sense of purpose. It wasn't how he had planned his life to go, but he felt at peace with his decision. The lanterns at the inn were still lit when he arrived. After a deep exhale, he dismounted Molly, tied her to the post, and knocked on the inn door. "Deputy Jennings?" Martha asked as she opened the door. "Is everything all right?"
"Yes, ma'am," he said, removing his hat. "I was just wondering if I could speak with Miss Whidby for a minute."
"Let me announce your arrival. Why don't you go have a seat in the parlor?" Martha pointed to her right, and Jesse walked that direction as she turned to go up the stairs. No one else was in the parlor, so Jesse chose a straight-backed chair near the entrance and sat down. His hands curled and released the brim of his hat as he waited for Kate to arrive. "Jesse, to what do I owe this visit?" Kate stood in the doorway, her dark hair down and framing her face. She was not Pauline, but she was pretty, even more so with her hair down. Jesse stood and cleared his throat.
"I've come with a proposition for you, Kate. I know we don't know each other well, but I also know you have no money to keep paying your room here or to purchase a ticket home."
Kate's posture stiffened, and her chin lifted defiantly in the air. "I was planning to wire my brother and ask for money to make the trip home, which was not a perfect scenario, as the whole reason for me coming out here was not to burden him. But Ellen gave me the idea of looking for another man in search of a wife."
"The thing is,"
Jesse interrupted, holding up his hand to stop her rambling,
"I need you to stay here, since you're the only one who knows what Bill Easterly looks like."
He cringed at his callous words. That wasn't exactly what he meant.
"What I mean is that I have a solution that will allow you to stay here. I could use some help at the homestead. You tasted my cooking."
A nervous laugh bubbled out of his throat, and he cleared it again.
"I guess what I'm saying is I have a proposition that would help us both out."
He paused and glanced at Kate for a reaction, but her face was stoic. He got the feeling she didn't like being interrupted.
"We could get married," he said quickly, before he lost his nerve. "That way you'd have a home, and I could protect you in case Easterly showed up again. And if we ever find him, you would be able to identify him."
Jesse forced his mouth shut to stop the flow of words. He needed to give her time to think and process. He continued curling and uncurling his hat brim as he waited for her to answer. A tiny bead of sweat trickled down his back, and while he was used to sweating from the heat, he was not used to sweating from embarrassment. This moment was more uncomfortable than any other he could remember in his recent past. Kate tilted her head and stared at him. Another bead of sweat joined the first, as he waited for her response. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I knew when I agreed to come out here that I wouldn't be marrying for love, but I hoped I would at least find a decent man and a nice home. While my time here hasn't gone as I'd hoped, I would prefer an alternative to returning home and burdening my brother again. Since I am limited in my options, and it seems this arrangement would benefit the both of us, then I accept your proposal."
"Okay," Jesse said with a nod. "I'll speak with Pastor Lewis and set it up for tomorrow afternoon."
He glanced at her attire, which was a simple cream top and navy blue skirt.
"Do you need time to get a dress for the wedding?"
Kate shook her head. "The sheriff was able to retrieve some of my clothes. He dropped them off a few hours ago. I can find something which will work for the occasion." She gave him a tentative smile. "I appreciate all of you going after Mr. Easterly and returning what possessions could be found, even if I wasn't the sole reason."
"You're welcome,"
Jesse said as he replaced his hat.
"Have a good evening, Miss Whidby, and I'll see you tomorrow."
As he left, Jesse wondered what he had gotten himself into. Kate Whidby was nothing like his docile Pauline had been.